I'm Judy Becky, and I'm 31 years old. This story began on a cold November morning, one of those days when the air feels heavy with unspoken tension. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and I saw "Mom" flashing across the screen. I hesitated before picking up, sensing it wasn't just a casual call. The moment I said hello, her voice came through, calm but sharp, the kind of calm that hides disappointment. "You can't come to Thanksgiving until you apologize," she said. For a second, I thought I misheard her. I asked, "Apologize? For what?" She sighed, long and heavy. "For how you treated your sister. You embarrassed her, Judy. She told us everything." I leaned against the counter, trying to process. "You mean because I wouldn't co-sign her car loan?" I asked slowly. "It's not just a car loan," Mom snapped. "It's about family, about helping each other. Emily just needed a little support." I closed my eyes, the frustration bubbling up. "Mom, it's $26,000. That's not a little support. That's my entire savings." But she didn't care about the numbers. To her, my hesitation meant disloyalty. To me, it was about boundaries and responsibility. "You've changed, Judy," she said. "You used to care." The words pierced deeper than she knew. When the call ended, I stood in my silent kitchen, staring at the steam rising from my untouched coffee. It was strange, how one sentence could shatter something as sacred as Thanksgiving. Every year, that holiday had been our anchor. The smell of roasted turkey, Dad's laughter, Emily's off-key singing while setting the table. Now it felt like all of that had been erased because I refused to sign a piece of paper. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just couldn't take on her debt. Emily had always been impulsive, the type who wanted everything fast. New clothes, new car, new life, but never thought of how to pay for it. And every time, I had been the one to fix things, quietly cleaning up after her messes while our parents praised her charm. But this time, something inside me snapped. I didn't want to live my life cleaning up after other people's mistakes. So when she called a few weeks earlier, asking me to co-sign, I told her gently but firmly, "No, Em. I can't do that." Her voice had turned icy. "Wow," she said. "You really think you're better than us now, don't you?" I had tried to explain, but she hung up before I could finish. I thought it would blow over. It didn't. Instead, it snowballed, her anger feeding into my parents' disappointment until suddenly, I was the villain who forgot where she came from. Now, being told I wasn't welcome for Thanksgiving felt surreal. How could love be so conditional? How could one refusal erase 31 years of being a daughter and sister? I tried calling Dad that night, hoping he'd be more reasonable, but he avoided the topic completely. "Let's just cool off for a while," he said. "You know how your mother gets." His neutrality hurt almost as much as Mom's ultimatum. That night, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Family dinners, road trips, Christmas mornings. Emily smiling beside me, arms wrapped around me, as if we were inseparable. I stared at those images, wondering how people could drift so far apart and still pretend they were family. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I thought about showing up anyway, pretending everything was fine. But pride and pain held me back. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, realizing for the first time that sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel right at all. It feels lonely, cold, and misunderstood. But I knew deep down, I wasn't wrong. I had only said no. And that one word had changed everything. Days turned into weeks after that call, and the silence from my family grew louder than any argument ever could. It started small, missed calls, unanswered texts, my mother's cheerful group messages suddenly excluding me. Then came the social media posts. My sister Emily filled her profile with photos of herself at our parents' house, smiling at family dinners, holding pies, surrounded by warmth and laughter. The captions read things like, "Family is everything," or "Nothing like home for the holidays." Every post felt like a reminder of what I was no longer a part of. It was as if they had erased me, rewritten me out of the picture, all because I had said no. I wasn't angry at first, just hurt. It felt childish, like being sent to time out for disobedience, except I was 31 years old and had done nothing wrong. I remember sitting on my couch one night, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one from last Thanksgiving, me, Emily, and Mom in the kitchen, all laughing while basting the turkey. Emily's hair was a mess, my apron was splattered with gravy, and Mom's eyes crinkled in that warm way they used to when she looked at us. I stared at that photo for a long time, wondering how quickly things could fall apart. How could love vanish over something as practical as a car loan? I told myself not to take it personally, but every hour of silence felt like punishment. The worst part was how my mother weaponized guilt. She didn't yell or curse. Instead, she let disappointment seep into every word. When she finally did text, it was short and sharp. Your sister says she can't sleep because of what you did. Are you happy now? That message broke something in me. I typed out a dozen responses but deleted each one. No matter how I explained my reasons, they wouldn't hear them. To them, love meant sacrifice. Blind, unquestioning sacrifice. And maybe for years I'd been too willing to play that role. Emily and I used to be close when we were younger. I helped her with homework, covered for her when she stayed out too late, even gave her money when she couldn't pay her bills. I thought that was what big sisters did. But now it felt like all those moments meant nothing because I refused one favor that crossed a line. My parents didn't see responsibility. They saw betrayal. And Emily, instead of admitting her mistakes, hid behind their sympathy, painting me as the cold-hearted sister who chose money over family. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach knotted. I hoped it was Mom saying she missed me, or Dad asking if I'd come over. But it was never them. The holidays were coming closer, and my apartment felt emptier each day. The thought of Thanksgiving without them felt unbearable, yet I couldn't bring myself to apologize for something I didn't do wrong. I started to notice things I hadn't before. How my parents always took Emily's side, how their affection came with strings attached. Maybe this silence wasn't new. It just felt louder now that I'd stopped trying to please everyone. I replayed the argument in my mind. Mom's disappointed sigh, Dad's quiet avoidance, Emily's angry tears. And beneath it all, my own guilt. Guilt for choosing myself for once. The nights grew longer. I tried cooking dinner for one, but the sound of the utensils clinking against empty plates made my chest tighten. I realized that I'd always been the peacekeeper, the fixer, the one who smoothed over every family crack. But this time, I couldn't fix it. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe this silence was the price of setting boundaries. Still, the pain lingered. Family is supposed to be unconditional, but it felt like their love had terms and conditions, and I had finally failed to meet them. It was a Sunday afternoon when my phone rang again, after weeks of silence. The caller ID flashed Emily. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe an accidental dial. My heart pounded as I answered, unsure of what version of my sister I would get this time, the angry one or the guilt-tripping one. But her voice was oddly calm, almost too gentle. "Hey," she said softly, "can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to open that door again. Before I could answer, she added, "There's something you should know before Thanksgiving." Those words caught me off guard. The mention of Thanksgiving, after everything, felt like salt in a wound that hadn't healed. Still, curiosity, mixed with a longing to fix what was broken, pushed me to say yes. "Sure," I replied. "When and where?" She suggested Mom and Dad's house. That stopped me cold. "There?" I asked, my voice catching. "Yeah," she said quickly. "It'll be easier if we're all together." For a moment, I almost said no. The thought of walking back into that house, the same house where I'd been silently exiled from, felt like stepping into a storm I wasn't prepared for. But something in her tone, hesitant, almost nervous, made me agree. Maybe this was her way of making peace. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Or maybe Mom and Dad had finally realized how harsh they'd been. Whatever it was, I wanted to believe this was the start of something good. The drive there felt longer than usual, every turn familiar yet strange. The neighborhood looked the same. Kids riding bikes, leaves swirling in soft orange piles, but it felt different, distant. As I pulled into the driveway, my hands trembled slightly. The front door, painted the same pale blue from my childhood, suddenly looked intimidating. I stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to steady myself. When I finally knocked, the door opened almost immediately. It was Mom. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between relief and restraint. "Hi, honey," she said quietly, stepping aside. The house smelled like cinnamon and apple pie, the same comforting scent that used to mean home. But now, it only reminded me of how long I'd been unwelcome there. Emily sat in the living room, her legs crossed, arms folded tightly across her chest. Dad was in his chair, pretending to read a newspaper, though his eyes flicked nervously between us. I sat down across from them, waiting for someone to speak. The silence was thick, awkward. Then Emily cleared her throat and said, "So, I guess it's time you heard this." Her tone was strange, half serious, half smug. My stomach twisted. "Heard what?" I asked. She leaned back, studying me like she was rehearsing a line. "Surprise," she said with a small, almost cruel smile. "It's time you knew. You were adopted." For a second, I thought she was joking. My heart skipped a beat, then pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I laughed nervously, waiting for her to say, "Just kidding." But she didn't. Instead, Mom's eyes welled up with tears, and Dad looked down at the floor. "What?" I whispered. "What did you say?" Emily shrugged. "Don't act so shocked. You've always wondered why you were so different. Now you know." Her words sliced through the air like glass. I looked at my parents, desperate for denial, for them to tell me she was lying. But their silence said everything. My mother's lips trembled as she whispered, "We wanted to tell you when you were ready." I felt the room tilt. My breath came shallow and fast. Ready? How could anyone ever be ready to have their entire life rewritten in one sentence? I stared at Emily, my sister, the girl I had loved, protected, sacrificed for. And now she was looking at me with something like triumph in her eyes. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about family or forgiveness. This was about control, about resentment that had been festering for years. She hadn't called to reconcile, she had called to reveal. The words echoed in my mind, sharp and cruel. "You were adopted." The room spun, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly, even as tears burned in my eyes. Emily smirked, as if satisfied. Mom tried to reach for me, but I stood up before she could touch me. I didn't shout, didn't cry, not there. I just turned and walked out, my heart breaking with every step. Behind me, I heard my mother's faint whisper, "Judy, please." But it was too late. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. When Emily said those words, "Surprise! It's time you heard this. You were adopted," everything inside me froze. My body felt like it no longer belonged to me. The room, the furniture, even the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, all of it blurred into a distant hum. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a cruel joke. But no one laughed. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and my dad kept staring down at the carpet like it suddenly became the most interesting thing in the world. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "What did you just say?" Emily crossed her arms, her face a mixture of satisfaction and irritation. "You heard me," she said sharply. "You were adopted. Mom and Dad didn't tell you because they didn't want to hurt your feelings, but since you've decided to act like you're better than everyone, Why not tell you the truth? The words hit like shards of glass. I looked at my mother, searching for denial, for anger, for anything that would make it untrue. But she only looked back at me with trembling lips and a tear rolling down her cheek. We wanted to tell you when the time was right, she whispered. Her voice cracked, fragile as if it might break at any second. You were only 6 months old when we brought you home. We loved you, Judy. You were always ours. I felt my breath catch in my chest. 6 months old. I repeated. You mean, my entire life has been a lie? Dad finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. It wasn't a lie. We just didn't know how to tell you. You were so young, and then the years passed. We thought there would be a better time. We never meant to hurt you. But all I could hear was the echo of Emily's voice, the smug tone lingering in the air. You were adopted. It repeated in my mind like a broken record. I looked at her and saw something I'd never noticed before, a flicker of resentment, of something darker than simple anger. This wasn't compassion. This was revenge. She hadn't told me to bring us closer. She'd done it to cut me down, to strip away the one thing I'd always clung to, belonging. I stood up, feeling my legs tremble. You knew, I said slowly, turning to Emily. You knew all along, didn't you? She shrugged, looking unbothered. Yeah. Mom told me when I was 15. She said I should keep it a secret until they decided to tell you. She smirked slightly. Guess that never happened. My stomach turned. The room felt too small, too heavy. Why? I asked her. Why tell me now? She tilted her head. Maybe because you needed to be reminded that this family isn't just about you. You think saying no to me gives you some moral high ground? Please. You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for Mom and Dad's kindness. Her words cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. I could feel my heart breaking, not just from the truth of being adopted, but from the cruelty of how it was revealed. My parents' silence screamed guilt. My sister's tone screamed jealousy. I took a step back, my voice shaking. All this because of a car loan? Emily looked away, but the smirk lingered. Sometimes it takes something small to show who people really are. I turned to my parents one last time. You should have told me, I whispered. You should have trusted me with the truth. Mom tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. My tears blurred their faces into shapes and colors. The house that once felt safe now felt like a stranger's home. Without another word, I walked toward the door, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and real. I stood on the porch, trembling, realizing that everything I believed about love, family, and trust had just been rewritten. Behind me, the house was quiet, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely alone, not because I had lost them, but because I had never really belonged to begin with. I drove for hours that night without any destination, just letting the road lead me away from everything that felt false. The world outside my windshield blurred into streaks of light, but inside the car, everything was crystal clear, the silence, the ache, the disbelief. I kept hearing her words, replaying like a cruel echo in my mind. You were adopted. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. The more I thought about it, the more pieces of my life started to shift, like a puzzle rearranging itself into a picture I no longer recognized. Every family photo, every story my parents told me about when I was a baby, suddenly felt like part of a script I hadn't agreed to perform in. I pulled into a gas station just to breathe. My reflection in the window looked strange to me, like a stranger's face wearing my expression. Who was I, really? Who were they? And what kind of sister uses something so sacred to wound? My hands trembled as I held my phone. I wanted to call my mother, demand answers, maybe even forgiveness. But I couldn't. I couldn't unhear the way Emily had said it, with that cruel half-smile, the satisfaction of finally having something over me. When I finally went home, the quiet was unbearable. The apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a question I couldn't answer. I sat on my couch and stared at the framed photo of me and Emily from years ago. We were teenagers then, grinning in matching Christmas sweaters, arms around each other. How could the girl in that picture have grown into the woman who just destroyed my world with one sentence? I realized then that this wasn't just about a car loan. This was years of resentment exploding in one cruel act. Emily had always been the favorite, the charming one, the golden child who could do no wrong. I had been the responsible one, the one who worked hard, paid bills, kept things steady. I thought they needed me. But maybe, deep down, Emily had always felt threatened by that. Maybe she'd always known something I didn't, and that secret gave her power. When I thought back, there were clues, subtle things I'd brushed off over the years. The way Mom would pause when people said, "Judy looks just like you." The way Dad once said, "You were meant for us," and I'd thought he was just being sentimental. Even Emily's occasional teasing about me being different. I'd laughed it off, never realizing it was all true. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to decide what hurt more, that I'd been lied to my whole life, or that the truth came out in the most heartless way possible. The next morning, Mom called. I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying all night. "Judy, please come over," she said softly. "We need to talk." But I couldn't. I wasn't ready to see them, to look at their faces and wonder which parts of their love were real and which were built on secrecy. Days turned into weeks. I didn't go to work for a few days, telling them I was sick. The truth was, I felt hollow, like something essential inside me had been stolen. I went through old photo albums, studying the baby pictures, trying to find traces of who I used to be before the truth shattered it all. I realized something then. Emily hadn't just revealed a secret, she'd exposed every crack in our family. Love built on lies can't survive forever. It might look perfect from the outside, but it's fragile, ready to crumble at the first truth spoken aloud. And that's exactly what had happened. My parents' silence, Emily's jealousy, and my refusal to keep playing the role of the dependable daughter had collided into a truth none of us could escape anymore. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be part of that family again, not until I found out who I really was, and whether any of their love had ever been real. That night, after leaving my parents' house, I sat in my car in complete silence. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, realizing that the life I thought I knew had just ended. I wasn't who I thought I was. I wasn't their daughter by blood, and Emily wasn't really my sister. My whole identity felt like a story someone else had written for me, and now the ending had been ripped out and rewritten without my consent. I wanted to hate them all, Emily for her cruelty, my parents for their deception, but under all that anger was a deeper ache. I still loved them. That was the worst part. As I drove home, tears blurred the road ahead. The city lights flickered past my window like ghosts of old memories. Every red light, every quiet intersection, brought back flashes of my childhood. My first bike ride with Dad running beside me, Mom kissing my scraped knees, Emily braiding my hair before school. None of those moments were fake. They were real. And yet, knowing what I knew now, they all carried a new kind of pain. I couldn't stop asking myself, did they ever love me the same way they loved her? Or was I always just the replacement for someone else's child they couldn't have? When I finally got home, I walked straight to my mirror. I studied my face, looking for traces of them. My mother's green eyes, my father's sharp jawline, but I couldn't see any of it anymore. All I saw was a stranger. I whispered to my reflection, "Who are you, really?" The only answer was silence. That night, I didn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to the same painful truth. I didn't belong anywhere. But somewhere in that grief, a small voice inside me began to whisper something else. Not anger, not despair, but curiosity. Who were the people who gave me life? What kind of woman was my birth mother? Did she think about me? Did she regret giving me up? I realized that, for the first time, I wanted to know. I needed to. If my entire identity had been hidden from me, then I had to reclaim it myself. The next morning, I began searching for her. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. This was something I needed to do alone. I started with what little I had, the adoption papers my parents had tucked away in an old box in the attic. I had never looked through that box before. It was full of things from my childhood, school drawings, report cards, family vacation photos. Hidden beneath them, in a faded brown envelope, were the official documents. My hands shook as I opened them. There it was, my full birth name, the one I'd never heard before. A line that said, Mother, confidential. But there was also a clue, a hospital name, a city, a date. It wasn't much, but it was something. I reached out to a private adoption agency that specialized in reunions. The process was slow, filled with waiting and uncertainty, but each step gave me a strange sense of peace. It wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about finding myself, about understanding the roots of the woman I'd become. In that waiting, I began to forgive. Not for them, but for me. I realized my parents hadn't lied out of cruelty, they'd lied out of fear. Fear of losing me. And in a strange way, that fear came from love. Weeks passed before I finally got a call. We may have found your birth mother, the woman on the phone said. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into a part of my life I'd never known existed. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the city lights again, I realized something powerful. Maybe love isn't defined by who raises you or who gives birth to you. Maybe it's defined by truth, the courage to face it, no matter how painful it is. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't just someone's secret anymore. I was my own beginning. It took months before I was ready to meet her, my birth mother. The agency arranged everything carefully, confirming her consent, the date, the place. It was a quiet little cafe on the edge of town, far enough from where I lived that it felt like neutral ground. I remember waking up that morning with my heart racing so fast I could barely eat. What do you even say to the woman who gave you life and then gave you away? How do you prepare for a moment that changes everything you thought you knew about yourself? I must have changed outfits 3 times before settling on something simple. Jeans, a sweater, nothing that tried too hard. I didn't want to be someone else when I met her. I wanted to be me, whoever that was now. When I arrived, the cafe was half empty. Soft jazz played in the background, and the air smelled of coffee and cinnamon. I scanned the tables until I saw her, sitting near the window, a cup between her hands, her posture nervous but graceful. She looked up at me and froze, her lips parting slightly as if she couldn't believe I was real. And in that instant, I knew. I didn't need a test or proof or papers. There was something in her eyes, something familiar, like seeing a reflection of emotions I had never known how to name. I walked toward her, my legs unsteady. "Hi," I said softly. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. She stood up, trembling, and for a moment we just stood there, staring at each other. Then she whispered, "You look just like your father." The sound of her voice cracked something open in me. She reached for me, and I didn't hesitate. I let her hug me, and for the first time in months, I felt warmth instead of confusion. She held me as if she'd been waiting a lifetime to breathe again. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into my shoulder. "I didn't want to let you go. I couldn't take care of you. I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me keep you." We sat down, both of us struggling to find words that could fit the weight of what we felt. She told me about her life back then, the small town, the fear, the shame her family made her feel for being pregnant so young. She said giving me up was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but she'd always prayed I would have a good life. I listened, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. I told her about my childhood, about my parents, about how I found out the truth. She cried when I mentioned how Emily had told me. "That wasn't fair to you," she said. "You deserved to know with love, not anger." The more we talked, the more I realized that meeting her wasn't about replacing anyone, it was about understanding myself. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She was the missing chapter of my story. Before we parted, she held my hands tightly and said, "You were never forgotten, Judy. Not for one single day." I believed her. That evening, when I got home, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt calm, grounded in a way I hadn't felt since that awful Thanksgiving ultimatum. I made myself dinner, set a small table for one, and lit a candle. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful. I smiled and whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular but to everyone who had shaped me, the parents who raised me even with their flaws, and the mother who had loved me enough to let me go. That Thanksgiving, I didn't join any family gathering. Instead, I cooked my own meal and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was simply free. I had found the truth, faced it, and made peace with it. And I realized something profound. Family isn't just who shares your blood or who raises you. It's who chooses to love you honestly, without conditions or secrets. I looked at the empty chair across from me and smiled. I didn't need to fill it. My table, my truth, and my heart finally felt full. True family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by honesty, respect, and unconditional love. Sometimes, the hardest truths lead us to discover who we truly are, and the peace that comes from choosing authenticity over approval.